Hello guys, and welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be looking at some of the teams that missed the playoffs who I think have the brightest futures. Now, some teams, they missed the playoffs and it's oh sad, everybody's crying, but some teams, it's like, hey, we made progress and we should be good pretty soon. And these teams are the teams that I'm looking at who in the next 3 to 5 years, I honestly think could be very good and consistent playoff teams. So let's go in alphabetical order with these 5 teams that I found that shouldn't be that sad that they missed the playoffs with the Anaheim Ducks. And the Anaheim Ducks this season, despite going 30-30-30, nope, not 30-30-30, that doesn't add up to 82. 30-33-14 for 6th in the Pacific. I think they had a pretty good season and definitely overachieved what I expected of them. They even held a playoff spot throughout the middle of the season and showed that they should be a good team in the next few years. Now, they did lose Josh Manson, they lost Hampus Lindholm, and Ryan Getzlaf's retiring, but from Hampus Lindholm, Josh Manson, they got a ton of prospects, and Rickard Rakell, I'm forgetting about him, but no, they got a ton of prospects from all of those trades, or not prospects, a ton of draft picks from all of those trades, which will become hopefully good prospects if they make the right draft picks. And honestly, with the right moves, I think Anaheim could be a playoff team as soon as next year, because let's look, they got Trevor Zegras, Troy Terry, and Jamie Drysdale are some young forwards who really will help be a core piece to this team in the future, with Trevor Zegras making every game fun to watch. Troy Terry's emergence, he's become great. And Drysdale may be going a little bit slower, like developing slower than you'd hope, but honestly, he should be a good top pairing defenseman someday. And looking at their prospects, like they've got some very good prospects here. And Olen Zellweger, Sasha Pastushov, Mason McTavish, who were all drafted in the first round last year and should all be very good. Like Zellweger is dominating the WHL right now. Absolutely dominating. He's leading defenseman in points, and like he has a good amount of goals too. And it's not like he's being carried just because he's on a good team. No, Zellweger is playing great and putting up these numbers despite being on not a bad team. He actually is on a pretty good team, but he isn't being carried by a player is what I'm saying. He's just been a very good defenseman. And then also, they actually picked up a good goaltending prospect in Kyle Klang as well. And I think Kyle Klang is a very good return for Rickard Rakell as well as that second, because Klang is a guy who I think when John Gibson moves on, if Lucas Dostal doesn't work out, I honestly think he could be a very good stud goalie prospect. Right now, he's putting up a 9.15 in the SHL, and he's only 19 right now. So Anaheim Ducks fans, you know, you got a pretty good goalie coming up, and Dostal obviously good as well. And then you got Henry Thorne, what does that say, Thrun? I have to look down sometimes to read. Henry Thun and Sam Colangello, whatever that's pronounced. Those are 2 interesting NCAA prospects to look out for. We're both doing pretty good, but at the end of the day, they've got an abundance of young prospects and a good amount of young players. And if they can surround this team with the right players, I definitely think that we could be looking at Anaheim maybe 2 years from now would be my actual prediction, and saying, man, these guys are going to be a consistent playoff team. But now moving on to my second favorite team, and the team that I'm excited to get to, and I'm wearing their stuff right now. I only have so many teams' jerseys, but I do have Buffalo's, and Buffalo this year is 29, 38, and 11, and they've actually gone 5th in the Atlantic. And yes, if you heard Buffalo went 5th in the Atlantic before the season, you'd be like, oh my god, they were actually competing for a playoff spot. Not quite. The top 4 and the bottom 4 are very separated, but they're leading the charge for those bad teams. So Buffalo fans, be happy about that. And also be happy that I think that they could be a playoff team as soon as next year. And I know I said that with Anaheim, but with Buffalo, I honestly think they have so much young talent, like even more than Anaheim, that I think they have the second biggest chance of the 5 teams on this list to be a playoff team next year. Like, if we look at their young players, the list is on right now. You've been seeing it for a little bit. It is large. There's a large list. Tage Thompson, Darling, Cousins, Krebs, Jokiharju, Middlestat, Tuck. All those guys listed, and all of them 25 or under, who I think will be very important core pieces to this team headed in the future. And Tage Thompson is absolutely blowing up this season, but all these guys should be very important in the future. I'm not going to talk about each one because there's so many of them. But then we move on to their prospects, which is where I'll kind of get in more depth here. Voice crack happens sometimes. But looking at their prospects here, you obviously have their first overall pick from last year's draft, and that is Owen Power, who has looked great in his debut in the NHL, has been maybe not putting up the offensive totals you'd hope, but honestly, I didn't expect it. But defensively, he has looked great, and I expect that offense to come maybe next year in a couple of years, maybe not immediately, but eventually he should be putting up some solid offensive numbers and be a solid defenseman. And then you got Oliver Nadeau, their 4th round pick from last year, looking good. And then you got their couple of AHL players, John Peterka and Jack Quinn. Now, Jack Quinn is the better of the two for sure, and I believe the younger of the two. But Jack Quinn has looked fantastic, and despite him looking fantastic, I have to speak out John Peterka, who should be a solid player someday as well. And who knows, maybe they even end up on a line someday. I have no idea. I think they're on a line in the AHL. But the one who should be a star someday, and I think will be a star, and possibly that first line guy, Jack Quinn. I think he's that good. I honestly do. I think he's that good. And then obviously you got Devin Levi, their goaltending prospect, and I think their future in net. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, sure, but Devin Levi, if he signs, because I think he's going back to the NCAA for another year, and I'm kind of scared that he can re-enter the draft, so please let me know if he can. I really do not want that to happen, because that would be really sad as a Sabres fan. I want to see him in a Buffalo Sabres jersey. That would be fantastic. So Buffalo, definitely a team I see being great in the future. But now, on to the next team in the alphabet, and we are only going to the letter D, because next team that I think should be very good in the next 3 years is the Detroit Red Wings. Now, unlike Anaheim and Buffalo, I don't see them making the playoffs next year. Just because I think with Detroit, it's going to be more of a slower rebuild. Not that Buffalo's with a fast rebuild by any means. In fact, they've missed the playoffs for 11 years and broke the record. But Detroit, I still think they're getting out of that a bit more. They're going to be a little bit of a slower, sort of like they have been. This year, they went 29, 37, and 10 for 6th in the Atlantic. And again, you know, a couple years ago, bottom of the league. Last year, a little bit better, and this year, a little bit better than that. And next year, a little bit better than that. That's what I expect, at least. But looking at their forwards, you can see them 24 years and under. I didn't want to go to 25 with them. The only reason I had Alex Tuck on the other list for Buffalo is because of the trade. I wanted to mention him. But with Detroit, you have a good amount of young forwards. Obviously, Raymond and Seider, the two Calder players competing for the Calder, as well as Zegras. And I know Raymond slowed down, but he'll be fine. I'm not worried about it. And then Zadina, will he turn out? I don't know. And Vetrano, same thing. Will he end up being a good forward? He has the potential to. He has the skill. It's just a matter of bringing it all together and really making it work. And then you got Hronek, who's very good offensively to an extent, but not quite defensively. But we'll see. Maybe he gets that. But yeah, overall, they have a interesting team actually overall. But their prospects they have a pretty decent prospect pool. Starting off with their two absolutely major prospects from last year's draft, and that is Simone Edvinsson and Sebastian Cossa. Simone Edvinsson has looked great, and when they drafted him 6th overall, I was like, why? Because I could not understand why he was in the top 10, why everybody had him ranked in the top 10. I looked at his highlights, and everything was just like, oh, he made a good pass. Like, oh, cool, he made a pass. But here's the thing. He has turned out great. He had like no points in the SHL in this draft here, and everything Yzerman touches turns to gold, I guess. So this year, he turned to gold because in the SHL, he has been absolutely fantastic. And then a little bit of a different story for Sebastian Cossa, because Cossa this year has not looked good at all, actually. I went to a Oil Kings game where he got pulled. He let in like 4 goals on 15 shots. It wasn't good. Whatever it was not very good. And Kossa's numbers this whole season just have not been very good. And I expect him to bounce back because, let's be honest, like I said, everything Yzerman touches turned to gold. I'm sure Cossa will as well. I think he just needs some more time. Because remember, he's only 19. He has a ton of time to become that good goalie that Detroit drafted him to be. And then we go on to Cross Hannes, another guy from the WHL, who's an overager, but if he can transition to the NHL well, could be a solid forward for them. Carter Mazur, NCAA, a pretty good forward. Jonathan Berggren, interestingly enough, does not have an H and is not said Jonathan, unless it's said Jonathan and there's no H. That's even weirder, actually, than just not having an H. But Jonathan Berggren, I think, might be their best prospect that's not Simone Edvinsson or Sebastian Cossa, because he absolutely lit up the SHL last year. And this year, he's transitioned over to the AHL and has played pretty solid. And honestly, if all goes well, he could be a very good prospect or very good player for the Red Wings in their future. And then you got Soderblom, and the reason I have Soderblom here, not necessarily because he's the greatest prospect ever or because maybe he has that potential to be the greatest prospect ever, but he should be a solid player, and he's also 6'8". That's only 2 inches taller than me. Like, I'm 6'6", and this guy's taller than me. That's absolutely insane. And Soderblom, if he can learn to use that size very well, which I'm not sure if he can, but if he learns to use that size very well and can translate to the NHL level, again, could be a very solid forward. But this Detroit Red Wings team, I'm sure in the next few years they will be good. But the way Yzerman does things, he does short-term contracts, all that, I'm sure they'll be good. I'm not too worried about him. Yzerman has Detroit in good hands. Detroit is in good hands right now. But now I'm switching papers to the New Jersey Devils, who's the next team I have on this list. And back when I did Buffalo, I said that there's one team who I think has a bigger chance of making the playoffs than Buffalo, and that is New Jersey, who this year has been pretty disappointing with a 26-42-7 record for 7th in the Metro, because New Jersey this year was expected to be competing for a playoff spot to the end. They added Dougie Hamilton. They made all these moves that made them look like, yeah, Thomas Tatar, they made these moves that made them look like, we're ready, we're going in, we can compete, and it just hasn't happened, and it feels like they're always a step behind. Even last year, they were a step behind. This year, they had greater expectations than last year, but again, they failed to they failed to just achieve them. But we look at their players, and there's a lot of young players who broke out this season, including Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, and Jack Hughes. And mostly Jesper Bratt and Jack Hughes broke out, but Nico Hischier definitely has had a better season and probably his best season of his career this year, and I only expect him to get better. And then Sharon Govich, a very solid player. Mercer has been a pleasant surprise for New Jersey, and he'll only get better from here. And then Ty Smith, who's an interesting one, because last year he was very good. This year, not so much, not bad, just below what you expect, and I'm sure he'll get his game back, and I have him on this list because I do believe he can be a core player for them in the future. But now onto their prospects, and New Jersey has a couple of very good prospects, and the prospect that I definitely think is the best has to be Jack Hughes and Quinn Hughes' brother, but we're going to focus on Jack Hughes because we're in New Jersey right now. Luke Hughes. There's a lot of Hugheses going on, but Luke Hughes has been amazing, and some people think he is the best defenseman of his draft class, even better than Power. I can't understand why people say that, and I don't know if I agree with it. I definitely need to see him at the NHL level, but I understand why it said that because he, I believe, broke the record for defenseman goals in Michigan and just has been on an absolute offensive tear this year, and I think he'll make an immediate impact to that Devils team and be that power play driver for them there as soon as next year. And then we move on to Alexander Holtz, another very early draft pick for New Jersey. First round, the year before Luke Hughes was Holtz, 2020, and he hasn't panned out great yet. He's been fine, but I think that there's more there. I don't think we've seen all of Alexander Holtz. I think he's one of those prospects that just needs some more time to really find his game, which he kind of has in AHL this year. I'm excited to see how he does in the NHL because I think he hasn't exactly done great in the 7 games he's had, 2 assists, but he's had his moments, and I'm sure he'll be fine. And then you've got Fabian Zetterlund. He's proven himself at the NHL a bit this year in his 8 games. And in the AHL, he played very good as well. And then Arseny Gritsyuk, who I think is one of the most underrated prospects after looking at him. I have never heard of this guy ever. And I look at his stats in the KHL this year. In 39 games, he has 28 points, 16 goals. It's been great. The Olympic games, he had half point per game, 3 points in 6 games. And this guy, he's still really young, and I honestly think he can make an impact for this Devils team. And it's funny because I've never heard of him. But Devils, a team that they should be good next year. They should be. I really honestly think they have a decent, a 50-50 chance of making the playoffs next year. But knowing that they'll underachieve, I'm going to say that the 50 that they don't will succeed and they'll just miss. So maybe in my season prediction, I'll have them in like 5th. But the Devils definitely have a good team. The only question I have for them is goaltending. What do you do with that? You know, every goaltender that's gone there this year has not looked great, just not one of them. So that could be a hit on the defense as well. But they need to figure that out. And now on to the last team on this list, and that is the Ottawa Senators. And the Ottawa Senators this year, like the New Jersey Devils, are kind of disappointing with a 28-40-7 record. They're 7th in the Atlantic, and they just, they were expected to be further out in their rebuild. Not quite as far as the Devils were, not quite as good as them this year, but still better. They were expected to be better than they are. And they still have a good amount of young forwards, and I think this rebuild is still going to end up being successful. I just think it's going to be slower than what you would have hoped it would be, because Philip Gustafsson is appearing to be that future goalie for them, and whether he does end up being that, I don't know. He's shown that he can be. He's also shown that there might be some questions there, but next year will tell us more about him. And then you got Kachuk, Stützle, Norris, Batherson, all 4 of those guys. Very good forwards, definitely core forwards for them in the future. And Shane Pinto, the interesting one, because he got to a bit of a slow start this season. And last season, he showed he can be good. We know he can be good. He's been good in the NCAA. And this year, a slow start and then an injury has held him out. But I still think he will be a good core forward for them in the future. And I'm not even mentioning Thomas Chabot here. Maybe I should have, but he will be a good forward. Nope, if he is a good forward in the future, I guess that's okay. But you want him to be a defense primarily. But he will be their charging, definitely first defenseman on that team for the future. But now to their prospects, and their prospect list definitely is not as big as the other team. But I do think they have 2 very good prospects, especially defenseman Jake Sanderson, who is, Jake Sanderson is debatably the best defenseman of the 2020 draft, and he's looked great in the NCAA this season, putting up a great amount of points, a great amount of goals. And then you got Ridley Gregg. Ridley Gregg is a double overager in the WHL, and he's the max age. He's 20, and he's put up some good offensive totals, but again, with those guys in the WHL who are 20 and put up good points, you don't really know. So we'll see if he can translate those to the NHL. Not quite 80 points in 60 games, but translate that game to the NHL. And this prospect list, I must say, would look a lot better, but the Ottawa Senators decided to draft third-round projected player Tyler Boucher in the first round, and I still have no idea why, but whatever. I guess they thought that there were teams lining up. They're like, well, they're lining up in the first round. They're like, we need Boucher, we need Tyler Boucher, we need Tyler. Nope, it wasn't happening. So Ottawa, don't draft a third rounder in the first round this year, because I really think you have an opportunity to add probably a good defenseman, maybe a forward, but a good player to your prospect pool without drafting a guy who would be in the third rounder. Just don't do that. Don't do that. But Ottawa, again, a team, I don't expect them to be in the playoffs next year. I don't know if some people do, but I don't. I still think they need a couple years, but a team that will eventually be a consistent playoff team, I do believe. So thank you guys for watching. If you are still here, this is my second time recording this entire video because I did not like how the first one turned out. And if this one turned out bad, then just imagine how, see, this is why. If this one turned out bad, then just imagine how bad the first one was. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna go now. Probably eat supper because it's like 5:30 around my time. So I will hopefully see you guys in the next video. See ya.